Hello, Bluurg TV. I'm Ben Vendetta. I'm a rock and roll writer out of Cleveland, Ohio. I've been running a small record label called Elephant Stone Records for 20 years, and I've started writing rock and roll themed fiction 9 years ago. So far, I have written 3 novels. The first time I discovered punk was probably through public radio. My parents were NPR nerds, so I grew up hearing about all the world's news on public radio as we were getting ready to go to school in the morning. And it caught my eye when they started talking about this group from England called the Sex Pistols, who were going to come to America on their first tour. I had never heard the Sex Pistols. So I didn't really know what was going on. I was about 13 at the time of their first American tour, so I didn't really know what was going on. But when Sid Vicious died, I started to learn more about them. The first band I actually heard on the radio was The Clash, who got some play on Detroit radio. And then a friend's older brother in high school told us about the Sex Pistols. We went up to visit him where he was studying at Michigan State University, and he put Nevermind the Bollocks on the stereo. And that to me was electrifying. They were definitely up a notch from the Clash. I liked the Clash, but there was something traditional about them. The Sex Pistols felt new, crazy, and refreshing. I started writing fanzines in the late 80s. I was inspired by a fanzine called The Big Takeover. I did a couple of small ones, which I won't name, in Michigan before getting a writing gig for The Big Takeover, where a cover story I did on the Pale Saints was actually my first really proud writing moment. When I started Vendetta in 1995, I kind of wanted to focus on stuff that I thought wasn't covered in American zines, like a lot of UK indie. And, as the 90s went on, the scene in Los Angeles with, the Brian Jonestown Massacre, Warlocks, Dandy Warhols, who were from Portland, but part of a sister part of the scene. Turning point for me was when I decided to study abroad in England for a year, my junior year of college at the University of Essex. And that's right around the time the Jesus and Mary chain were getting going. I discovered the Jesus and Mary chain on a TV show that was popular at the time called The Tube. And, they performed a few songs on The Tube, and I was immediately blown away. In the year 2000, I quit a very secure editorial job at Harvard University to move to Los Angeles. Through my fanzine connections, I hooked up with Dionysus Records and got a job doing PR for Dionysus. I love 7-inch singles. We didn't really do very much with Elephant Stone. My dear friend Jason Pettigrew calls 7-inch singles audio baseball cards, and that's kind of what they are now. A couple of great songs, but it's more of a physical collector's item these days. Back in the day, punk DIY 7-inch was how you made yourself, but now 7-inches are vinyl's so expensive as it is, but you pretty much lose money putting out a 7-inch. But it's a good way if you can get bands that are too big to be on your indie label but like you enough to do a one-off like we did with Outrageous Cherry. That's a wonderful thing to do, so it was worth it. Elephant Stone's mission was to bring some more psychedelic, Anglo-inspired music to the United States. I felt like there were American indie bands in that genre that people were not paying attention, so I tried to do my 10 cents worth and put out some. Strangely enough, one of the groups that really stuck out for us, we put 2 albums by them, was a Canadian group called Daydream Nation, named after the Sonic Youth album, of course. But they were the only band that we have ever signed straight off a demo. They sent us a demo that was just unreal. We barely had to do anything with it to get it out. It was pretty much ready to go. We had someone master it, but it was really pretty much ready to go. The second album involved a lot more work, but those 2 records we're quite proud of. That was really what our mission was about: unknown bands, that fit a certain genre. Later on, when we were a little more established, Elephant Stone put out some reissues. One I'm especially proud of is an American shoegaze group called Smashing Orange, who, before getting a little more mainstream, put out several EPs in the UK that were really better than groups like Ride at the same kind of thing. In fact, Alan McGee was torn between signing Smashing Orange and Ride, and he ended up going with Ride. But the early Smashing Orange singles compiled on our 1991 compilation are really some of the best shoegaze music ever made. So this is my debut novel, Wivenhoe Park, which was published in 2013. Everyone always asks me why it's called Wivenhoe Park, so I'm going to get that out of the way. Wivenhoe Park is a beautiful scenic area with a pond in Essex, England. The University of Essex was built on the park, in the 20th century, so it's a relatively newer university. Wivenhoe Park is also the name of a famous landscape painting by John Constable. So I just kind of wanted to add something a little more literary to the title than just some typical punk rock name, so I went with that. The novel is set in mid-'80s England. It's about an American expat spending a year away in England, discovering a lot of new bands, meeting women, taking drugs, having a good time, just trying to find himself. So it's coming of age rock and roll fiction. My best known novel, Heartworm, which was published in 2015, came as a rejection. Initially, it was pitched to the folks at Bloomsbury who do the 33 and a third series. It was pitched as a novel that takes place in 1995 with a character being close to the band, so it's written in the same style but different. I wanted to do something like what Joe Pernice did for Meat is Murder with 33 and third, instead of interviewing people and going about all the boring studio details and something. I wanted to write something that really popped, but it got rejected, long story short. I found another publisher to put this out and actually went to Ireland. The timing was perfect. 20th anniversary of Heartworm, the album, which inspired the novel. Really big event in Dublin. Members of the band turned out. A lot of press who were nostalgic for the time period. It led to some really great press. And now, as we speak, the 30th anniversary of the album, it's been reissued again. I've been interviewed several times. Just by kind of persisting and not giving up when I got rejected by 33 and a third, I've become sort of an American expert on Whipping Boy. This would have never happened if I just gave up after my rejection. Sunset Trip is my third novel, which came out in 2018. It's the one I'm most proud of. I think it's set in Y2K Los Angeles. And it's from the music industry perspective. It's about someone who works for a small independent record label. He's very wrapped up in the scene. He's just out of rehab, has been away from music for a few years, trying to come back to the music scene while staying clean. So it's your sex, drugs, rock and roll, Los Angeles, Y2K, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with a much cooler soundtrack, if you will. So here are some tips for writers, and it would apply to musicians, which I found useful. I did not major in writing in college. I've never taken a writing class in my life. I just decided I wanted to write fiction, so I'm not coming from that MFA background, which is what a lot of people think you need. It's a very punk rock attitude to writing. Put it this way, Iggy Pop never went to music school, so why should I go to writing school? I've had 3 novels published, and really the way that I've done it and built momentum is through the internet, especially Twitter and to a lesser extent Instagram. Fuck Facebook. You don't want to be on Facebook. Twitter, I got a publishing deal in the UK straight up through Twitter. Someone was starting a new press, and they were a fan of my novels and made an offer on my third novel, Sunset Trip, and reissued my first 2. A suggestion I would have, if you are going the traditional route, don't blindly just send your product to any record label or magazine expecting a review. I can talk about this on 2 angles. As a magazine publisher, we would get a lot of releases that just had nothing to do with what we were covering. Do some research. Don't send to something that's genre inappropriate. Don't send don't send your punk rock novel to like an academic press. Use some common sense, do some research. If you do connect with someone, keep it short. Offer to send a chapter or two. Just and show that you know the business you're approaching. Like, don't just send something like, I'm a fan of your label. Tell them why you're a fan of the label. Tell them that you were blown away by this single that so and so band put out. It changed your life, and you want to be part of something that changed your life. Bullshit if you have to, but find the right people, connect, socialize, do it. Another thing I'd like to talk about writing is you see these tips by famous writers where they say, oh, you got to write 8 hours a day, every day, even if you don't feel like it. A lot of these people make a living out of writing. Most of us have jobs. I wrote 3 novels while I was working 40 hours a week for a stressful financial media job. I sure as hell didn't write 8 hours a day, but I knew exactly what I wanted to write. My suggestion is to take good notes. When you're in the mood to do it, really go for it. 1 or 2 hours of really concentrated writing, knowing exactly what the hell you want to do, beats 8 hours of fucking around. Another tip for writers, and it can apply to bands again too, is self-publish. Put out the damn thing yourself. You don't need, in this day and age, almost no one is going to give you an advance. Trust me, no one indie is going to give you an advance, and they're going to take the money. Put it out yourself. There's easy self-publishing platforms on Amazon where you don't need an ISBN for a digital publication. You might, if you do need an ISBN, there's services where you can just do a small print run and they'll provide it to you. It's the same way that labels will provide a barcode for CDs. But honestly, vinyl these days, you don't even need that anymore. So really, do it yourself. That's what punk was all about. DIY, man. Thank you, Bluurg TV. It's been a blast. I've really enjoyed talking about music and writing with you guys.